Welcome to another episode of Annulment Proof, where we take Catholic Divorce Inc. to the woodshed. I'm John Farrell, with no job and no life. So I got to spend all day making this response video here to Joe Heschmeyer, which I saw this morning. Is Joe pro-divorce? The answer is yes. Just like a pro-choicer is actually a pro-abort. Well, if you allow a little divorce, you're pro-divorce. We're going to expose where he's getting it wrong with his divorce video, his annulment video, and then I'll give you a little test at the end, I guess, how to check a really easy one, how to check if your annulment is real or not.
Welcome back to Shameless Potpourri. I'm Joe Heschmeyer. And today I want to explore a question that many people have. For a great number of people, the chief difficulty they have in embracing Catholicism isn't about a major theological controversy or a doctrinal issue, so much as it is a case involving the complicated issues of marriage and relationships in their own life.
That's because it is theology issue and doctrinal issue. That's why. You can just say it's all complicated and it has nothing to do with theology or doctrine. Yes, it does directly.
Because it's not uncommon that when people are looking into the Catholic Church, the question that they're facing involves a possible need for an annulment of a prior presumed marriage. And look, if you believe that God wants you to be Catholic and then hear from the Catholic Church that they think your marriage is invalid or that you're being asked to live as brother and sister or separate from the person you regarded as your wife.
I hate brother and sister. I don't even believe that. I don't know, digress on brother and sister, but I don't think it's cool at all.
If that's a large pill to swallow, and frequently the advice given is just get an annulment. But that attitude of kind of the automatic annulment leads many to ask, well, the church has what looks on paper like a very strong teaching on marriage. In practice, don't we often find annulments treated as Catholic divorce? Now, I think that charge is particularly relevant in the context of American Catholicism.
Well, he's making the video, I think, because people are talking all the time. This doesn't go away. Isn't NFP Catholic contraception? Aren't annulments Catholic divorce? The answer is yes to all of it, okay? But let's keep going.
A 2011 Catholic World Report
article.
All right,
so basically he's admitting that, look, there's just been a huge increase. That's right.
Noting that while fewer than 6% of the world's Catholics are American, Americans make up a full 60% of declarations of right. Now, that's from 2007. So 20 years ago, at least, American Catholics were 10 times as likely to have a marriage annulled as the ordinary non-American Catholic. The numbers have seemed to have improved a bit since then, but Americans are still massively overrepresented. And once more, about 90% of annulment petitions in America get approved. Now, admittedly, this number again is a little bit skewed because dioceses will often not even begin a petition process unless they already think there are good grounds for annulment.
Dioceses will not start in here. Let's go back and listen to that real quick. Whoop, hang on.
Not even begin a petition. Now, admittedly, this number again is a little bit skewed because dioceses will often not even begin a petition process unless they already think there are good grounds for annulment.
All right. Anyone who knocks on their door, they will start the process because they're like, well, we don't know until we start figuring it out. So no, this isn't like they only take the good ones. They'll take anybody. If you've been married for X years and stuff hit the rocks, you're going to get the annulment. You're just gonna. I think Seattle's like 99%. They have. Anyway, it's a huge problem in the USA. We're the annulment capital. Everyone knows that. The question is why, and I have the answer. I think I am the lone person who will admit the answer, which I learned from Dr. William Marshner at Christendom College in his 1978 essay, which explained that they have taken the essence and changed it. Wait till you hear the notes. Wait till you see what I've got on that. Hold on a second.
But even if you add the caveats there, the things may not be quite as extreme as the numbers initially suggest, but the allegation overall seems
No, they're
fair.
extreme. They're totally
annulments
extreme.
In the U.S. look pretty easy to get.
People say, oh, they're not easy. They're hard to get. Okay, I don't care if they are arduous or whatever. If you want the annulment, you will get the annulment. There's a couple exceptions, but pretty rare. You're going to get, and then if you really want that annulment, you just go to a different diocese, whatever. You'll get that annulment.
So is this just Catholic divorce?
Yes, because if it walks like a duck, and we're going to get into some of the theological changes. That's a little bit tricky. But I want to try to make it like idiot proof because that's the only way I can try to make sense to me. I don't like to get in all people start diving into all these different definitions and make it like super obscure and hard to figure out. No, we don't do that. Homie, don't play that.
And if so, does it undermine Christian teaching on marriage?
Yes.
I think the answer in part is yes. I think it's a good objection and one that's worth taking very seriously. So I thought today.
The thing is, they don't take it seriously. When you bring an argument an erudite one, as they say in Pashendi, they'll have a conspiracy of silence. When I call Catholic Answers, they pull the plug. Like, get this guy out of here. I don't call anymore. All they do is route you, or they won't even take your call. No. So, hopefully Joe Heschmeyer will respond to this. He does tend to respond sometimes, but I did a video on. I did a video on some of this divorce stuff a few months ago. I got no response.
It might be worth exploring that answer in two parts. First, looking at why the church has such a high moral teaching on marriage and why that bar is so high in the first place and why it requires something like annulments to happen. Why not just say, why don't we just get divorced and be married? And second, I want to look at some of the real problems we face with annulments and how they can easily become a sort of Catholic divorce when coupled with a false version of mercy. I'm then going to close with a little bit of
false version of mercy. It's not the false version of mercy. It's the ideology of divorce and a loophole. That's all it is. That's the cause. This is, like I said, what is the cause of the annulment explosion? Change of essence to accommodate NFP legally. That is it. That's why no one will talk about it, because don't you be talking about my NFP, fool.
For everyone involved, whether you're a person seeking an annulment or struggling with the granting of an annulment that you think shouldn't have been given, or even a priest working in a tribunal handling annulment cases. Now, I'm not qualified to give that last bit of advice, so I want to...
Okay, you don't have...
turn to share some of the great advice.
You don't have to be qualified. You can learn the canon law and know what it is. And like I said, the essence can't change, but the essence has changed in practice. So we have now, what was the object of marriage is now the subject of marriage, and that subject is subjective.
And both by Pope Leo and prior popes on exactly this question. But before I get there, let's start with that first point. Why does the church have a high moral bar on marriage? Well, ultimately, because Jesus has a high moral bar on marriage. This is an area where I think one of the greatest scandals is not
a high moral bar. No, it's absolute. Like a high moral bar on abortion. It's absolute, man.
About annulments being Catholic divorce. It's about so many Christians being comfortable with actual divorce and remarriage in a way.
He keeps saying divorce and remarriage, divorce and remarriage. Well, no, divorce period is the topic, is the key. Because annulments have nothing to do with remarriage necessarily, but they have something to do with divorce. Okay, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We got to catch this guy. Like I said, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed, eh? So we got to get this guy in the woodshed. We're going, Mr. Nice Guy, super smart, knows a lot of stuff. Get ready, Joe.
That is completely contrary to Christian teaching and the gospel. You see this, for one, in the divorce and remarriage rates. Now, it's true they're not quite as bad as the secular world, but you'd expect a massive difference between the rates of divorce and remarriage among Christians and non-Christians. But all too often, we find that the rates are too close for comfort.
Okay, Catholics divorce at the same rate as the secular society. That's what his point is. And it's sort of true. Catholics divorce a little less. I did a little research on it while I was drinking my coffee this morning. And I think the divorce rate back in like 1950, as a benchmark, 20%. 20% of Americans got divorced in 1950, but only 5% of Catholics, 5%. So there's a huge difference. Whereas today it's more like, 30% Catholics and 40% regular. So Catholics caught up big time. The reason for that is the change in law. But at any rate, keep going, Joe.
So
when I say law, I meant change in canon law, change in the way they effectively changed the marriage essence legally.
The teaching on divorce and remarriage that Jesus gives is that if a man divorces his wife and marries another,
if a man divorces his wife, stop. If a man divorces his wife and she's innocent, he commits adultery by divorcing an innocent spouse, because you have to be together for life. So you should and can divorce or separate from a guilty spouse, or you're a simp. But if you divorce from an innocent spouse, you're going to hell. That's the exception clause. This is the part that Joe doesn't get into at all, because NFP will not allow the exception clause, because NFP requires no marriage contract, which means there's no exception to a non-existing contract. NFP requires love is everything. Love is number one. Love wins. No contract, no exception clause, because there's nothing to have an exception of. So they took this Jewish idea. There was some Jewish guy. I did it. Like I said, I'll send the link to the previous video. Let me get the name of that video. Hold on a second. This is the video right here. Girl boss exception with Joe Heschmeyer. Catholic Inc. feminist divorce exception. So I went in detail, man. I forgot how long was that video? Over 2 hours, where he brings out some of the same arguments. So we're gonna shorten it quite a bit. But I just want to let you know that is the video if you want to get a deeper dive into this.
He's committing adultery. As Jesus says in Mark 10, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery.
Yes. And so a lot of things, like fornication in the broad sense means more than just the restricted sense on, what fornication is. There's all kinds of fornication. There's all sorts of adultery too. Adultery can be anything that works against marriage. I got some killer Bible quotes towards the end of the video you're going to want to hang on to. No one else is going to, you're not going to hear them anywhere else. You're just not. All right, go ahead.
We find that exact same teaching on Jesus' lips in Luke 16, and it's the same teaching that we find St. Paul proclaiming in 1 Corinthians 7.
Oh, what is it? I got to see this really quick. Sorry. I didn't even know he flipped through these. And he said to them, whoever divorces, marry, yeah. Okay, got it. Everyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. Yeah, okay, that's right. To the married I give charge that the wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, let her remain single or else be reconciled to her husband at the husband. All right, so this is more Corinthian stuff. Let me make a point right quick. The word separation and divorce, there's a bunch of different terms for that mean different things in the Bible. Now they're all, so when you hear divorce, people use like 4 different divorces in the same way. And this is how they can sneak away at it. If people have, sometimes a word can mean 3 different things, but people use it for something else. I'm going to nail that down real directly and straightforwardly later in the video through the notes, because Joe Heschmeyer is playing fast and loose with the definition of divorce, okay? Which is and Protestants do the same thing because they don't know any better, I guess. I don't know, but they do. It's just that they have no bishop, so they can't have a contract. And now we're all goofed up too as Catholics because we fired our bishop and we used the state to adjudicate our marriage contract, which isn't a contract, right? So it's like no fault. I'm going to talk way too long if I don't shut up. Go ahead.
You may not divorce. And if you do separate, you're required either to reunite or else to live celibately. You are not free to remarry because to do so would be to commit adultery.
Yeah, that's right. The marriage bond exists. So now all we do is just get rid of the marriage bond, and we call it annulment when it's just Catholic divorce because you allow the separation, and then you just figure out a way to make the bond never existed. It wasn't really there in the first place. It's not hard to figure out, but the canon lawyers are way ahead of you on all this. So by the time you figure it out, it's 30 years later or something like that. So I've already kind of figured it out. It took me about 10 years of intense calling every tribunal in the country 3 times and interviewing as many people as I could before they hang up the phone to get to the bottom of it. And then AI and researching doesn't hurt. That's the internet kind of saves you on that.
In the mid-100s, St. Justin Martyr sums up Christ's teaching on chastity by saying that all who, by human law, are twice married are in the eyes of our master sinners, as are those who look upon a woman to lust after her. And Justin Martyr isn't alone. Henry Cruzel's comprehensive study of the first 5 centuries of Christian writings found that, with one exception, every church father agreed that divorce and remarriage were always forbidden without any exceptions.
It's about teaching that divorce and remarriage, yes. Following divorce for any, wait. Contends that the first 5 centuries, all Greek and Latin writers except one agree that remarriage following divorce for any reason is adulterous. Yes, but divorce for a bad reason is also adulterous. Just divorce alone is a form of adultery. Adultery means that which is against marriage. That's what it means. So when you put away an innocent spouse, that is a form of adultery.
Now, needless to say, that's a high moral bar. In fact, when the apostles hear this, they respond by saying, if such is the case for a man with his wife, it is not expedient to marry.
Yeah, in other words, hey, if you got to stick with one wife your whole life and not separate unless she does something bad, then don't get married because that takes our options away. But what have we done today? We've given all the options you want because, hey, if it doesn't quite work out, it wasn't really there in the first place. That's all that they do, Joe.
They recognize that Jesus is actually going far beyond the Mosaic law found in the Old Testament. And they recognize this because Jesus tells us that he's doing so. He acknowledged that the Mosaic law permitted divorce in some circumstances. For the hardness of your heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. So it's important to recognize both that.
Yeah. As you have said it before, and you guys know, that's because they used to toss their wives off a cliff because if they could unalive them, then they could get a new model. And Moses is like, look, don't do that. We're going to let you divorce because I don't want you to kill your wife.
There's a high bar in Jesus' teaching on marriage, but also why. And the why is pretty simple. Man and woman become one flesh in marriage. And what therefore God has joined together, let not man put asunder. The state is not the one who makes you and your spouse one flesh. God is.
Yeah.
And so neither the state nor any human power is able to undo what God does.
So what God puts together is when you do one flesh, you also have the contract. Kind of like your head belongs to your body. If someone comes and takes your head off, that's violating. That's not just a civil effect, okay? I'm going to go remove somebody's arms and legs. So those are just civil effects. There's no sin in that. That has nothing to do with natural law or anything. If you take someone's arms and legs and remove them, those are just civil effects. That's like an abortion is just a civil effect, right? It has nothing to do with natural law. No, separation has to do with natural law. And this is what they deny. This is what Joe denies, that separation pertains to natural law because marriage is public, and if it did pertain to natural law, then the public would have to judge it. That would be the bishop, but they don't. Wait till you see the quotes I have. Hold on.
So it's not just that you shouldn't undo your marriage, it's that you literally can't. Now, if you understand these points, then you should understand three things. First, if God united you and your spouse, divorce and remarriage are not just undesirable, they're completely unacceptable. And in a
Wait, what's completely unacceptable?
real way, marriage, three things. First, if God united you and your spouse, divorce and remarriage are not just undesirable.
If God united you and your spouse, in other words, if your marriage is valid, hey, they're almost all valid. If you know where babies come from, they're valid. And if you divorce, aka separate, divorce, the 2384 CCC, when you divorce, what that means in that instance is you are separating from an innocent spouse. And if you did not get the bishop's permission to separate, you are separating from an innocent spouse because only the bishop can judge the contract, which exists. As I said, there ain't no contract anymore because NFP, in video killed the radio star, NFP killed the marriage contract. It's no longer there anymore. So there's nothing to talk about. All there is to talk about is remarriage. So as far as the obligations, the rights and obligations of marriage, they don't exist today. That's why permanence is optional. If the marital debt is optional, permanence and fidelity are also options. If what is essential is optional, everything that is essential is optional. That's why there's no such thing as a cafeteria Catholic. You get rid of one. If you deny one truth, you deny them all. If you allow one public sin, you allow them all. Right now, we allow public sin big time. Anybody who divorces is a public sinner. And divorce is defined as separating without the bishop's permission. That is what divorce is defined as in 2384. Okay. Anyone want to talk in the comment section? You know me, I'm all about it. Unlike Joe Heschmeyer, he may click like or something like that. I'll talk to everybody all day long. Like I said, I have no life, I have no job, I have no mortgage. That's the new reality. I do have a lot of puppies I'm taking care of, and I still have a lot of tires in my driveway I got to fix and take care of. But I'm working on trying to get rid of. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to keep one puppy or not. Maybe at the end I'll bring out the puppy and you guys can tell me, thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay, continuing.
They're completely unacceptable. And in a real way, they're impossible. What you describe as divorce and remarriage is regarded in the eyes of our master simply as sin and adultery. Second, this explains a curious quirk we find in Matthew 19.
A curious quirk we find. It's a curious quirk. Hello, it's called divine law, the exception clause. It ain't no curious quirk, homie. No. Let's go back, curious quirk.
Because there we find, second, this explains a curious quirk we find in Matthew 19. because there we find the exact same teaching from Jesus prohibiting divorce and remarriage. But this time there's this curious language, except for, and then the Greek word there is porneia.
All right, so he's going to go on. The exception clause is, I think there's an exception clause also in another part of the Bible, but it's all the same thing. This is what Protestants do. You say, look, Jesus says, if you don't, unless you eat my flesh or drink my blood, they're like, oh, if you go to the Greek and really read that, what he really means is, unless you play ultimate frisbee with me, that's what he really means. Okay, so we know some, because we know the original Greek. Or, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Oh, when you read Petrus in the Greek, what it really means is pet rock. It doesn't mean the rock of the church. And so we know what it really means now. And then stop with all this going back to the Greek stuff, okay? Which is what I'm going to do in a minute, but I'm going to explain why I do that. We're Catholic. The Bible interpretation never changes, or it's wrong. Also, we can always look at what all the saints have said and what all the popes have said and all the doctors and stuff like that have always said until 1965. Hello. So this exception clause is, I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's CCC 2384. That's what it is. If you separate, you're committing adultery. That's public sin if the spouse is innocent. But if you separate from a guilty spouse, that's a good thing, and you should do that. And I'm going to give you some really cool Bible verses about that later. But only the bishop judges who's innocent and guilty. Wait till you see. Okay, go ahead. Let's hear you. Talk to me, Joe. Talk to me.
Except for porneia. Now, porneia is the root of pornography. It's a word that is often translated as harlotry, or even better, fornication. Now, it's sometimes misread as Christians, as if Jesus is...
It's sometimes misread as Christians. Oh, these Christians are misreading porneia. So we got to get this straight, right, Joe? Tell us about it.
Permitting divorce and remarriage in the case of adultery, or in the case where one of the two spouses...
I see. So he's right like that. Yes. So Christians, as in Protestants, they'll say, okay, hey, if you cheat on me, I get a new spouse, and that's what a lot of them do. If you cheat on me, I remember when my wife bailed on the marriage, my sister called me and she says, John, she broke the covenant. My sister who turned Protestant, and I was trying to figure this. I'm like, what? This is why I'm making these videos, you guys, because so many people don't know this stuff, and when it happens to you, you're like, where do I go for answers? Don't go to Catholic Answers. Don't go to Rose Sweet. Don't ask your pastor either, because they're all under the twilight zone, man. Anyway, I'll think of that other movie in a minute. Listen, get the definition of marriage straight, and you kind of got to go to the internet to get it. Okay, so I'm going to return back to like 1950 definition towards the end of this video. At any rate, go ahead.
Is sexually immoral in some way. Jesus says that if you divorce and remarry, you commit adultery. And the Greek word for adultery is used there. But when he says except for porneia, it's actually a different Greek word being used.
Except for porneia. So now they're going to say this is the exception clause is unless you were never married. That's all he's really saying. He's like, look, you're committing adultery unless you were never married. That goes without saying. It's really stupid. This is why absolutely nobody interpreted the exception clause like Joe Heschmeyer before 1965. So for the first 1,965 years of the church, everybody knew what the exception clause was. Separating from an innocent spouse. Separating from a guilty spouse. Your spouse has to be guilty, then you can separate. But the bond remains till death in all cases. That's it. And now, since we've gotten rid of the contract, there's nothing to separate from, so we have to make it annulment, and we also have to justify all our annulments. And by the way, like I said, that if you go back to my video I showed earlier, which I'll put a link to that I did on this, it's Jewish in origin. This interpretation was a Jew thing, early 20th century. And now it's been incorporated into Catholic ink and all the new translations of the Bible, how they put, unless the marriage was unlawful. No, unless you commit adultery, aka porneia, unless you do something against marriage, unless you have a guilty spouse, you cannot separate. That's the teaching. That's the doctrine. That's the divine law, not some quirk, okay?
So Matthew is clearly signaling that Jesus is not talking about adultery right now. Plus, if you read it as if there's an exception clause in Matthew, then you can, in fact, separate what God has joined together in the case of adultery. Or
you can separate what God has joined together as far as the contract, the bed and board, because that is the word used in the Bible when they say divorce. Like I said, there's four different words for divorce in the Bible. And I color-coded them, and I put them in the notes, which we'll get to, okay? So the kind of divorce they're talking about in the exception clause is separation with the bond remaining. That's the divorce.
In the case of some other sexual sin,
let's go back.
Jesus in Matthew, in the case exception clause in Matthew, then you can, in fact, separate what God has joined together in the case of adultery or in the case of some other sexual sin.
There's a contract, Joe. I don't know if I may have told you that. Marriage is a contract. Marriage is the contract itself. Leo the 13th, Arcanum 23. It's a contract even in the CCC. And the exception clause is you can, again, live separate with permission of the bishop. Ever since the church took marriage in-house somewhere around 1100, then they govern all this marriages. So you can't get an annulment on your own, nor can you get a separation on your own. That's why here's a question Joe Heschmeyer either doesn't know the answer to or will not answer because it's going to freak him out. Where did all the separation courts go, Joe, that were in your diocese up until 1970-ish? That's why I always say when the White Album came out, the separation courts died. What was their purpose? Where did they go? The answer is NFP killed them. That's what happened, and that's why we cannot discuss it because we have to get rid of our NFP to bring back marriage and justice and the contract and the normal Catholic interpretation of the exception clause, none of which we can have because we have to have NFP. We are so goofed up, nor can anyone discuss it, which is why you have goofballs like me who retired early so I could try to make some videos, okay? Because no one else wants to go there. And we'll see if we can get some of this House of Cards knocked down a little bit. Go ahead, Joe.
Then Jesus in Matthew is contradicting the point he's just made about how we're not able to do that.
Yeah. Let no man put asunder what God has joined together, and you can't do that. And he joined together the contract. So does that mean you can never live apart per Scripture ever? No. In fact, Trent, I think it's Canon 8 I think it's 8, says you're anathema if you say that you can never separate. You can, but you're also anathema if you say anybody but a bishop can judge the case. So Joe Heschmeyer later in this video will say, guess what? All you have to do is put on your bishop hat, and now you're the bishop, and you get to judge your own case. So, hey, let's look at Joe's shirt. Is it ugly or is it cool? I'm going to judge that it's really cool, but his sister-in-law may judge that it's really who's right. Who has the authority to judge that? Nobody. Okay, but because no one's in charge of that. But who's in charge of that marriage contract? God. And who does God put in charge? The church. Who's the church? Ecclesia, the bishop.
And this also creates a biblical contradiction, because Jesus in Matthew would be contradicting the much higher moral bar of Jesus in Mark and Luke. And he'd be contradicting what St. Paul teaches as Christian teaching in 1 Corinthians. But it turns out there's actually an easy answer to this objection. Porneia is a typical word used for fornication, not the...
Yeah, so he's going to say, look, if you're fornicating, then if you're not... The exception clause is fornication. Obviously, you're not fornicating with your spouse, so the marriage, there's no marriage there. That's just dumb. If you look at, again, I could probably get all into this if I want to spend all day researching. I've done it already with some. If you look at like Cornelius a Lapide and all the fathers and stuff, the exception clause is for a guilty spouse. That's it. That's all it is. But Joe is going to do kind of that Protestant thing where they just zero in on one word and then say, this is what it means. We're going to forget about, like when you ask a Protestant, hey, what religion were all what kind of Christians were walking around in Paris in 907 AD? They're like, well, in other words, history, you cannot do history. Joe doesn't want to do history either because it's going to ruin his whole, it's going to ruin his life, man. Catholic Answers goes down in flames once they start looking at answering the question, what happened to the separation courts? The separation courts were there because of the exception clause in Matthew 19:9. You can separate for fornication. You can divorce if the marriage is unlawful. Same thing, meaning if somebody is doing something against the law, against the contract, then you can separate. Who judges that? The separation courts. What happened to the separation courts? And like I said, they were just given to the state because we don't have a contract anymore because there's a new love in town. It's called the NFP contract right there. There it is, right there. We will. Go, Joe.
Typical word used for adultery. So when the Bible is translated into the Latin Vulgate, this Greek word gets translated as fornicatio. And in fact, it's translated into English in the KJV as fornication, all 26 times it appears. Why does that matter? Because fornication involves sexual relations between people who are not married.
Yes, fine. You've heard saints say, enough with your fornications. You can fornicate in marriage, as in if you're doing so not for procreation, if you for impure gratification. That's what NFP is, but we got rid of all that. So again, porneia, fornication, adultery, when discussing marriage doesn't have to be strictly the red letter A. And as proof of that, if you go to the separation canons, 1153, they'll say, and 1152 is you can separate from your spouse if they cheat. Okay, that would come under fornication. That would come under porneia. That's the exception clause. This is where this comes from. The canon law for separation is from the Bible. The exception clause. Then right after 1152 for cheating is 1153. You can separate if your spouse makes life unduly difficult. So if they're doing one of 100 things that's super insane, bad, nutso, that also counts as porneia, adultery. It's something against marriage. Wait till you see the cool quotes from Sirach that I have later in this video. You'll be like, whoa, no one ever told me this. I'm trying to get to the memo to Pearl Davis. She talks to Catholic people, some Catholic Inc. and stuff. I'd like to try to red pill her on. She's afraid of religion. And that's why I think once she figured me out, she's like, I ain't talking to this guy anymore. Pearl Davis likes to ask questions. She likes to ask these probing questions, and these guys are like, should wives obey their husbands? But when you ask Pearl Davis about Catholicism, she's like, no, I can't talk about that. Same problem. Anyway.
In other words, Jesus is not giving a permission slip to get divorced and remarried if
all he talks about is divorce, remarried, divorce, remarried, divorce. Divorce is the main problem these days, bro. Divorce is the main problem because you are allowing it because you're pro-divorce, because you are saying it's okay to take the contract in your own hands and tear it up. That's what you're saying, Joe. And so does Rose Sweet. And Layla Miller does in her own special way, too. They all do because TOB and NFP will not allow anything else because there's no contract.
Your spouse wrongs you by cheating on you or committing some other kind of sexual sin. Rather, he's saying that
hold on. Ooh, that sounded juicy. Hang on a second.
What he's 6 times that it appears. Now, why does that matter? Because fornication involves sexual relations between people who are not married. In other words, Jesus is not giving a permission slip to get divorced and remarried if your spouse wrongs you by cheating on you or committing some other kind of sexual sin.
He's giving you a permission slip to live separate if they do that. That's what the porneia is. You get the permission slip. And after marriage became in-house, public, the church said the bishop has to approve everything, then you have to go to the bishop to separate. I got to do the Divine Mercy Chaplet with the dogs. I shall return. Moving right along.
Rather, he's saying that what he's just taught about divorce and remarriage only applies to true marriages, not to sham marriages.
So only applies to true marriages, not to sham marriages. That's another way of saying only applies to valid marriages. This is why I say when you hear all this stuff about marriages between a man and a woman or marriages permanent, or no, that only applies to valid marriages. So everything's out the window if you say, oh, that my marriage isn't valid because I've judged it myself. Because Joe Heschmeyer said I could because there's no contract, so I can judge it myself. I'm going to reverse it just to warm up to what he was saying before.
Because remember, just applies. Rather, he's saying your spouse wrongs you by cheating on you or committing some other kind of sexual sin. Rather, he's saying that what he's just taught about divorce.
You know what I got to do? I got to fix my tagline thing on the bottom. Just a minute. Okay, fixed it.
And remarriage only applies to true marriages, not to sham marriages.
So your marriage was a sham marriage if you get an annulment. If you got married in the church and, quote, did everything right, that's a sham marriage. What else is he saying? He's like, yeah, because it's not a true marriage, a.k.a. valid. So people say this stuff, well, my marriage was natural, but it didn't rise to the level of sacramental. This is all like stupid, retarded TOB stuff, as in a natural marriage and a sacramental marriage are any different. They're identical in nature and essence. One gets grace, one doesn't, but they're exactly the same. Okay, continuing.
Because remember, just as there are sham marriages today, think, for example, of so-called...
Just because there are sham marriages. So he's trying to make his point that the exception clause is for invalidity, which it's not. It's for separation from a guilty spouse. But so they use these analogies, or they use these crazy examples, like, let's say you married your cousin or you married your twin sister. You didn't know. It's a sham marriage. That doesn't happen. That's why there was like next to zero annulments for a long time. But now, if, as you know, you get married, everything's in the yes column, then as typically happens, someone's childhood wounds come out and they're like, I'm out of here because I don't like the way you make me feel anymore. You're incapable of total gift of self because I'm feeling bad. If someone's going to be the parasite and the other spouse is going to be the host, and the host is like, I'm not playing that anymore, you're no longer capable of marriage, says the parasite. Not that the person is that, however, that's the way demonic narcissism works. That's the way they act. That's why they do the discard. They throw you out like a McDonald's wrapper. They don't think about it because they're on to the next thing. Really weird. This is why people are red-pilled on marriage, why this Catholic Inc. keep getting married stuff is completely stupid. Go back and get the contract right first. Joe Heschmeyer will just send you to the slaughterhouse, man. That's exactly what they call it when you send your marriage to the state for adjudication, and that's what Joe recommends. That's what Joe suggests. That's what Joe says. The Bible says you're supposed to divorce, which means you're supposed to just take your marriage to the state. Take your kids to the state. The state will tell which parent what to do with their kids, and forget divine law, forget natural law. Doesn't exist. No. And Bruce Jenner agrees.
Gay marriages, there were sham marriages back then. For example, Gentiles marrying people who were close relatives, unions that the Jews regarded as incestuous. And the Jews would refer to those unions as porneia, because the idea is those people might claim that they're married, but they're really just fornicating. So to put the issue very practically, if you convert to Christianity and you realize that what you thought was a marriage was really in the eyes of God a sham marriage.
So he's just like, okay, yeah, all those people who converted, and now you're like, what was the sham marriage? My booty. If you can have kids, it's valid. Nature is get married and have kids. If you say I do to till death, exclusivity, babies, it's valid. That's it. Do you know where babies come from? Do you know how to make them? That's all you need to be capable of, Joseph. That's it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You got to wait till we get to the notes.
Jesus is not telling you you're forced to stay in your fornication.
No, you're forced to stay in your fornication. Oh, this is super sick, dude. Jesus is not telling you this. Okay. You don't get to separate from your spouse on your own authority ever. You can temporarily if there's danger, but you have to ultimately get permission from the bishop because you're married in the church, because you're baptized. Any baptized person needs permission from the Catholic bishop because there's no salvation outside the church anyway. So and the church has ruled, Joe, I don't know if you know this. I can back it up. I'll show it to you if you want. Suspicion of invalidity does not justify separation on your own authority. You cannot do it just because I think my marriage is invalid. That's like saying I think that car over there is my car, so I'm going to take it. We'll work it. We'll change title later. No, so this he is saying, look, if you think your marriage is invalid, get out of there because God doesn't want you to be fornicating. That's how, and Father Chris Alar says the same stupid stuff. I think his sister got an annulment, apparently. His sister probably divorced, so he doesn't want her to go to hell. So he's this is what I'm suspecting anyway. So he's big on annulments and stuff.
You can and should divorce in that case.
Did I say Joe Heschmeyer was pro-divorce? He just came right out of his mouth. Listen to this.
Well, right in marriage, Jesus is not telling you you're forced to stay in your fornication. No, you can and should divorce in that case.
So he is saying you should take the law into your own hands. You should take that contract and rip it up, and you decide. Because you've decided that I'm not validly married. And let's say even if you have a clear case of invalidity, you don't bail. You have to go through public authority. If you were baptized and you got married in the church, that public authority is the bishop. And that's the problem with a lot of it. That's what most of us going on. There's tons of Catholics who are second and third time around Catholics. Now we have like whole swaths of them at these parishes milling about. Oh, I can't find a freaking new wife or what. It's like stupid. And then they have like these little fat people with gray hair dances and all that.
Well, read in that way, Jesus' teaching in Matthew harmonizes perfectly with his teaching in Mark and Luke, with St. Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians, and with the virtually universal Christian understanding of divorce and remarriage, really in the first millennium and a half before the Reformation.
Okay, sorry. So he's going back to history, and everyone understood that before the Reformation, before the Revolution, before the Protestants rejected the Pope, you mean? It was always the exception clause was separation with the bond remaining, and the bishop did it. And I'm going to show that to you in a minute. Hold on. And if you'd like to talk to me about that, that'd be a great conversation.
So the so-called exception clause in Matthew is really just Jesus pointing out that his teaching only applies if God has joined the two of you together.
So he's saying, as I've said this before, the exception clause is, look, if your marriage is invalid, none of this applies, which is obvious. Like, hey, you need to love your neighbor. Unless they're dead and they're in the ground and they're already buried, then you don't need to love them. You can pray. See what I'm saying? It's like, but they don't have to have a Bible verse that says, except for decomposition. You know? It doesn't make any sense, buddy. And this is why nobody interpreted Matthew 19 your way until 1965. That was when it started, as I said, because we have to make love the new contract. Therefore, there are no terms to the contract. Therefore, there's no exception to the terms because there's no terms. So we're gonna have tons of annulments. We got to have these annulments in the Bible or something. No, there is no scriptural basis for annulment. None. Zero.
One. That then is going to lead to a third observation. Because if you understand both what Jesus is saying, no divorce, remarriage, and why what God has joined together, man can't separate, then there's an important question we're left with. How do we know if these two people are really joined together as one in marriage? How do we know if God has joined them together, or if it was merely the union of the state, or if two individuals without divine sanction?
How do we judge if a marriage is valid? I told you earlier I'm going to give you a little info, and we'll go ahead and spill the beans. It's real simple. Almost all the annulments, as you know, are Canon 1095. If you are capable of having kids, if you know where kids come from, if you know how they're made, if you don't come from storks, and you can make a baby, it's valid. You have capacity for what you need. That's all it is. But now, again, the reason why it gets all, quote, complicated is because of this word intimacy. Because, as I said in my last video, a couple platypuses cannot be intimate, or zebras, but people can. Okay, so that means it's more than biology. Therefore, marriage no longer has an object of consent, but it has a a perpetual subject of total self-gift of love, and then we try to find this ecstasy stuff, in a TOB kind of way, because NFP creates this new weird non-object of consent, which is total gift or something. That's why marriage is complete trash and no one can actually consent to it, and it's not consummated until death. Sorry for all the ranting.
And it's that question that we're really exploring when we look at an annulment. Because clearly there are sham marriages. Take an easy case. You go to church, you say your vows, you believe you're married, but then 5 years later you discover the person you thought you were married to this whole time has secretly been married to somebody else. Well, has God joined the two together?
Stupid.
Seemingly not. After all, your spouse seems to be joined together.
It's not a sham marriage, dude. It's like, look, no one said he's trying to make it sound like the Bible's protecting us from sham marriages. No, all they're doing is they're rewriting the Bible to try to give us Catholic divorce under another name, and we're going to call it annulment. So we're just going to say there's no contract. That's all that's going on.
Those easy cases can get a lot more complicated. Maybe your spouse was in a Vegas wedding at 18 and they were drunk. Did that first attempt at marriage count? Or does their second?
So these annulment supporters do this all the time. They give you these really obvious, dumb examples. Like, yeah, okay. Nobody has that problem. We don't have a lot of drunk Vegas people. That's not typically it. It's typically people getting married for the first time. They get married in church. My mom wanted me to, and I felt uncomfortable or whatever, man. It's like, then X number of years later, they have 2 kids or 10 kids or whatever it is, and then something hits the wall, and they're like, this isn't valid. That's what's going on all the time. All the time. Tons of 1095 annulments. Now, when you've got this culture of annulment happening, a lot of other people fall through the cracks too, because people know that marriage isn't permanent, right? So there's a lot of other annulments that get lumped in there too. My dog is, you can hear him barely breathing in the back. I think he's 13. Randy, it's cool, man. Chill out. Anyway, go ahead.
Sober attempt at marriage, or neither. So there's a need for somebody, and ideally somebody objective, to sort these complicated questions out. So the whole idea behind having church tribunals...
Somebody objective to sort these complicated questions out. If you're going to use somebody objective, how about we use an objective standard, which we don't have anymore? God said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. What is that standard then, what marriage is, the essence? Cardinal Burke admitted in 2011, he says, now that we consider good of the spouses as essential, there is no accepted description for the essential, for the essence of marriage. No accepted legal description. We can't define marriage. You can't consent to it, but we're going to give you an annulment. Oh, well, that's really hard. Sorry about that. Sorry about all those kids getting completely trashed. Oh, shoot. Someone's calling. Hang on a second.
Investigating these issues is to provide a neutral forum to help people to untangle the messes that we make through sin and to figure out who is really married in the eyes of God to whom. Given this, annulments and annulment tribunals and all of that are a good thing, but they're not without their problems. So what are those problems? Well, several things. First, they're merely human judgments. Think about it.
Yeah, it's really easy to... I'm talking too much. Go ahead. They're human judgments. Yeah, that's right.
It is a matter of divine law that we do not steal. But when you have to get into the nitty-gritty of who owns a certain property, sometimes those disputes can become really complicated. And there's...
When you have to get into the nitty-gritty of... He's using an analogy, and this is fine. I use the same thing. When you have to find out where the property line is, who owns the property, well, that's an objective thing. You can determine that... we can go back to the records and look at the property line. Then we can say, well, it looks like it's right here. So there it is. Okay. But when you're talking about marriage consent to this object of consent, which is total gift of self, we can't even identify what a property line is. So we don't know what. So this is why it gets complicated. And this is why they're like, we really think these people deserve this annulment. So we're going to give it to them because why not? You can't say what violate, it's like, does this chili dog smell good? What's the legal answer? We can't tell you. There is none. It's the same thing with marriage. Was someone capable of good? Well, I don't know. Maybe. But who knows? There's no way to judge it. It's impossible.
Sorted out not by both sides just reading the 10 Commandments, but by sometimes in-depth factual and legal analyses, and those human judgments can sometimes fall short. Well, similarly, when we're looking at the law of God on marriage, there can be complicated factual and legal questions, and there can be disputes. I want to take an extreme example. What if your spouse disappears? They get lost at sea.
What if your spouse... He's using all these examples that don't apply in the real world. Really, what's going on is you have totally normal people getting married in the church. Things don't work out. someone gets mad, they divorce, they want an annulment because they want a new model. The gray divorce, right? It's going on all the time, tons and tons and tons of it. That's why they're Catholic divorce, because you're just saying, well, there wasn't enough love, someone wasn't capable of love. That's it. That's all it is to it. It's real simple, actually. When you once I figured it out, because I smelled a rat really, and then I read that essay from William Marshner, president of Christian College, and he wrote that essay back in 1978. It's called Annulment or Divorce, I think, and he exposed how the new code, which was being formulated at that time, basically took marriage and threw it out the window, and that's all that's going on today. But they use these dumb examples to try to sell the fact that it's Catholic divorce.
And you. Maybe they're alive, but they're kidnapped somewhere, or they're stranded on a desert island. In those cases, you're still married. You're not free to remarry. You have a
In those cases, you're still married. You're not free to remarry. There's a contract when you're married. You have to live together with your spouse. That's the part that they don't talk about. Marriage is not just a restriction from adultery. It's a restriction from saying no to the marital debt. That's what marriage is. But we don't do that anymore because NFP says it's the marital gift, and no one has a right to take a gift. So there are no more, so marriage has no rights anymore. Therefore, the right to educate your kids is out, permanence is out, fidelity is out. All that stuff's out the window. If I judge that someone was incapable of gift of self, it's all bye-bye, gone. What doesn't exist. And who's going to adjudicate this separation? Well, not the bishop, because there's no contract. So we just let the state clean up, quote, the civil effects. But they're not civil effects. Joe, I assume you're married. Joe, I bet you have kids. Do you have the natural law right to educate your kids, or do I have that right? What if I tell you, Joe, to get out of town, I'm going to educate your kids my way? Do I have that right? What if the state gives me that? The state gives... No. However, your wife can give your kids to me, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the bishop will say, well, just pray and lead by example, Joe. You know, there's nothing we can tell anybody because those are just civil effects. Your kids are civil effects, Joe, because NFP says so, because there's no contract.
Living spouse. But on the other hand, maybe something horrible happened and they died. Well, in that case, you actually are free to remarry. Well, how do you move forward? Amazingly, canon law actually has a process to handle those kind of cases.
Amazingly?
But let's take a more likely case. What if your relationship simply falls apart and one of you claims and seems to believe the marriage was a sham from the start, but the other one insists, no, it's really a true marriage? Well, once again, it's not like you can just look at a chapter or verse in the Bible that's going to just settle the question in most of these cases.
Yes, it will. The verse is increase and multiply. For this reason, he shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. That's the verse. For this reason. The reason is babies. That's why you consented. That's the thing you have to be capable of. That's why it's real frickin' easy. And I'm going to show you that in the notes in a bit when we get through with this video. Joseph?
Instead, it's going to often involve sorting through a pile of facts. And in the midst of that, you often have one person who wants an annulment, another who doesn't, and maybe some kids who have strong feelings about the matter as well. And unfortunately, in cases like that...
Oh, wait. One person who wants an annulment, one person who doesn't, and kids who have strong feelings. I wonder why the kids would have strong feelings. They always have strong feelings. The kids always do. They're either, we think the annulment's totally stupid, or we're really in favor of it. And the reason is the kids are alienated. Just like Stockholm Syndrome. Those innocent people in the bank, they had strong feelings about the guys with the machine guns. They felt attracted to them because they were so traumatized, they went to the bad guys. And that's what happens to the kids. This is why it's so sick when the bishop says there's no fault, because the kids have to pick a side or a version of, or they pick no sides, and then they become alienated from their own parents. It's super lame. But the bishop who has to do the tough thing and say, this spouse is innocent, this spouse is guilty, and the kids need to go with the innocent spouse. That's the way it's always been. The church must give the kids to the innocent spouse because the parents have the right to educate their kids, and that means it goes to the one who is with the marriage contract, the one who is still Catholic, who's acting Catholic. They get to educate the kids. But now, if you want to trans your kids, they'll get the kids. It's just a civil effect, Joe. Like I said, your wife can get the annulment, and then she'll give your kids to me, and that's fine, right? I mean, it's just a civil effect. Educating kids is no longer divine law because the bishop says it's up to the bishop. It's up to the state. It has nothing to do with him. He doesn't judge where the kids go. That's for the state, Joe.
Parties don't always tell the truth. After all, you're dealing with people whose relationship is broken down, who may have just been through a messy divorce, and who may want to manipulate the church into okaying their new...
Yeah, he's saying that annulments can be wrong if people lie. That's true. But if you said, I do to permanence, exclusivity, and babies, it's valid. Unless you have hard proof that before the wedding, you told people, I'm gonna lie about this, and it's on video, or somebody knows that, then... But I guess a bunch of people could have a conspiracy and lie about it all. That's why you have to have the witnesses. Anyone wants to talk to me about their annulment, or if they're getting ready to do annulment, or if they're trying to defend themselves, call me up. We can talk about it. You just don't even want to play ball with these guys, with the tribunal, because they do a fishing expedition. Tell me how you felt on 4th of July, the night that someone got in a fight, and all this stupid, retarded stuff. It's all about making babies, and that's it. Everything else is boyfriend, girlfriend irrelevance.
Relationship with somebody else. And particularly if this is the last hurdle somebody is facing before they're ready to enter the church and become Catholic, another problem can enter the equation as well. There can be a strong desire on the part of well-intended priests in the tribunal to be pastoral and to just declare the marriage null, even if the facts suggest otherwise.
Yeah, everyone, let's look, because believe all women, the girl's like, no. Oh, we'll get you that annulment. It's pastoral. Pastoral, my booty. Pastoral means helping people to not go to hell. When you give them an annulment, you're saying your divorce was not a sin, when in fact it is, because you never got the bishop's permission. Now you have to go back and make public restitution for that divorce, but you can't because you're in now you're going to get your new remarriage now. So how do you go back and fix that? It's not going to be, it's real tricky. It's a difficult thing. And that's why I did that whole video where I have the picture of the lady with the noose around her neck. Annulment seals your fate, because basically you go scorched earth on reality and you throw away the key. Like Jim Morrison, break on through to the other side. That's what you do, and it's real hard. And then you don't want to go back and face the music, so you go down when you die. That's the problem. You've got to reconcile your divorce with God. That means you have to either move back with your spouse, or if not, you've got to get a decree of separation from the bishop. If it's extortion, if you have an abortion, annulment won't fix it. If you have a divorce, annulment won't fix it. You still have the guilt of that sin, and you have to make restitution. Because it's a public sin. You ripped off somebody else. You have to make restitution. It gets complicated a little bit, and it also gets real hard to reach back and fix things. So this annulment, like I said, I think the devil's laughing all the way, not to the bank, but all the people dropping in hell because of it.
And as we're going to see, there's actually a twofold problem with that. First, it's contrary to the truth. And second, it's a false mercy. Because the mercy that you end up trying to show one person ends up being a cruelty to their abandoned spouse or their children in many of these cases.
Exactly right. That's totally a great point. Yeah, it's called charity and clarity. If you're just all charity with no clarity, if you're all compassion, or you're all whatever with no truth, it's vicious, it's bad. So this is why I'm trying to bring a little truth into the picture, Joe. If you start saying marriage is not a contract because of NFP, now you open up the door to all this perversion of nature, which is what divorce is. It's a sin against nature. That's bad. Let's keep going.
This doesn't involve a tribunal intentionally distorting the truth, just kind of erring on the side of granting annulments even on flimsy evidence. And I'd suggest that if you give in to that false mercy, you do end up undermining Christ's teaching on marriage, just as you would undermine Christ's teaching on theft if you kind of assumed every handbag in the store probably belonged to you.
That's a good point. If you misconstrue the teaching on theft, if you thought everything in the store belonged to you, you know what I mean? So that's why people, reparations, I'll just take it because I'm owed it. The store doesn't care. That's sort of my stuff. And I'll just take, okay, same idea.
So I want to offer a few kind of concrete thoughts here in closing. First, if you are somebody going through the annulment process and you find it frustrating right now, I understand. It can be long, there can be a lot of paperwork, and the outcome is often uncertain and may not go the way you want it to go. Well, to avoid a spirit of resentment, I think it can help to remember what's at the root of all of this, that we take seriously Jesus' words on marriage. And we believe that when you make a promise before God, that you're going to be married to someone until death do you part, that you're bound by that.
Not anymore, Joe, because there's, like I say, there's no contract, so you're not going to be bound till death. You can get out of it if you think it's invalid. Like you said earlier, if you think you have an invalid marriage, you're fornicating and you have to get out. You have to leave. So God wants you to file for divorce. That's why I say the NFP makes you into pro-divorce. Layla Miller, same thing. No contract, Layla. That's it.
If God responds to your vows by joining you two in marriage, we can't undo that. We don't want to try. Now, of course, we don't want to rashly assume that he didn't unite you two in marriage. So if we declare that that's null, it's something that should be done only carefully with a thorough examination. So
Again, you can annul any marriage if there's no definition of marriage. That's it. Anybody's property is mine if there's no definition of property. And Cardinal Burke, as I've said before, in 2011, admitted there's no definition of marriage right now. It's kind of whatever. Yeah.
Patient with the process. Second, remember the annulment process is only as good as the people involved. If you and your spouse or the witnesses are just dishonest, you lie, there's no infallibility that ties to the decision of a tribunal. They might just render a bad decision. Just like if you go to court.
Well, what do they call it? Divorce court is like liar's court. Everyone knows everyone lies in divorce court. Well, if someone wants an annulment and it's a 1095 because you're not capable, they're going to say, my spouse wasn't capable of charity because, the frying pan and the this and the that, and he didn't buy me the correct shutters when I wanted light blue, and all this going on. Oh, the kids were upset. Whatever, all that kind of. In other words, it all gets. How are you gonna find out what's true or not? You can't really. But if it's can you have babies or not, that you can find out pretty easy. That's why there was no annulments forever. And do you think, Joe, if Henry VIII were here today, would he get the annulment? Absolutely, for sure. There's just proof right there that they're fake because he didn't die for nothing. He was a saint for the right reason. He would guarantee you Henry VIII would get. I'm sorry, I meant St. Thomas More. That's what I meant. But Henry VIII would get the annulment. He would. Why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he? Guaranteed he would. It's obviously a redefinition. That's what it is. We're going to get to that in a minute on the notes, okay?
You lie on the stand in a secular court, you might get the court to make the wrong decision. So I really encourage you to strive to be painfully honest, even if it's not convenient. And if you believe you're not free to remarry in the eyes of God, if you're convinced in conscience, no, I know that was a real marriage, don't remarry, even if you've got an annulment on paper, because you know God will not be deceived.
Okay, yeah, he's right. You have to, if you know your annulment is fake, con gay, then don't act otherwise because you got to follow your conscience. And again, is it fake? Well, did you have any kids? Was it a 1095? Basically, 90-some% of the people who are listening to me now who got an annulment, the answer is yes. It was 1095, and they did have kids, and it is fake. It's legitimate, but it's error. So there's good luck with that. Good luck with that, especially if you're quote remarried. Now you're married to someone who's not really your spouse, but publicly they are, legally they are. Not a good deal, and you got to go back. You want salvation someday, right? You committed the sin of divorce. You have to go back. P.S. While I was thinking about this, if you attend an annulment wedding, you are saying the divorce was God's will. That's what you're saying. If you attend a marriage, an annulment marriage, and a second marriage, the divorce was God's will. That's how far we've come. And we've come there because of sentiment and the same reason the priests at the tribunal want to grant the annulment. They're trying to be, quote, pastoral. We're just trying to be nice and pastoral to the church approved the annulment. Yeah, divorce is not an inside job, but nowadays it is because of Joe Heschmeyer's NFP-inspired divorce Bible interpretation.
Third, while, as I said, I'm not qualified to give counsel to the priests on the tribunals. I've never sat on a tribunal. I'm not a priest. There have been several recent statements from popes on the need for tribunals to really cut it out with this false mercy. Both Benedict XVI and St. John Paul II decried the scandal of seeing the value of Christian marriage being destroyed.
Right. So look, we Bill Clinton or Hillary and stuff, we want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. And everyone's like, yeah, that's right. All the popes are saying the same thing. We want annulment to be safe, legal, and rare. Problem is, that would be a true statement, but you're talking about something intrinsically erroneous, a heresy, when you say that something other than biology is the object of consent. And that's what they're all doing. So it's like saying, we know where the surface of the earth is. You're standing on the ground. We can measure that. We know what is below ground, what is surface level, and what is above ground. So where is the legal definition of outer space? It's like, depends on how pastoral we want to be. Is it 5 feet off the ground or 5,000 miles off the ground? Well, we're still sorting that out. It's a new canon, and, so we've included not only the surface of the but the whole spirit of the surface of the planet. You'll never get to the bottom of it until you get back to normal, which is ground level, nature, touch grass, okay, that kind of stuff. Marriage is biology. Sorry, that's all it is. That's why when you hear that word intimacy, run the other way. It's conjugal act.
In practice, by the exaggerated and almost automatic multiplication of declarations of nullity in cases of failure of marriage on the pretext of some immaturity or psychic weakness on the part of the
he's saying
parties.
just
if you're a priest or if you're
just like Mormons and abortion, if you pray about it and you go talk to your elder or who the heck else, the guy in charge of the Mormons, you go talk to him and you pray about it, we'll let you do the abortion in the right case. So, but it's all in a spectrum, it's the same thing. You're taking something intrinsically wrong and calling it maybe.
Part of a tribunal that is regularly granting annulments on those bases, the popes are saying cut it out. And honestly, Pope Leo has some of the best counsel on the subject that I've seen. He pointed out that true justice and true charity are not opposed. They're instead intrinsically united. And he warned that misunderstood compassion, even if apparently motivated by pastoral
I read some of this stuff.
Actually undermines the truth.
I didn't like some of the things he said. It was okay, but he talked all about this true this and true that. He's feeling the same problem because he's an annulment guy too, Pope Leo, and he's a PhD in canon law, but he's an annulment guy, and you know what I mean? It's like saying if you're an abortionist and you really don't like it, but you're trying to be like as pastoral as you can about how to not have so many abortions. It's that sort of problem. Can't get rid of it until you put NFP back in the illegal column, back in the unnatural column. All this will continue. You can't stop it. It will not stop.
Tribunal, both in annulment cases and otherwise, must be based on a solid objective foundation.
Wait, undermining its rigor and fairness. Whether you should get an abortion or not doesn't have anything to do with rigor or fairness. It's natural law. So these annulments are based on a violation of natural law. They are saying that nature is not finite, that nature is not defined, because marriage is an office of nature. Now we call marriage something other than nature. It's beyond nature. Kind of like that car you own is beyond the car. That's why I can take it, because we can't define what the car is and what the car isn't, and I've determined that you aren't capable of owning that car, so I'll take it. You're not capable of owning your kids, so I'll take them. That's exactly what happens with these annulments. They give your kids to other people. They give your kids to the state. What are you going to do about it? Those are just civil effects, right? I'm repeating myself.
No, that said, he also reminds tribunals as well that there can be at times a cold and detached affirmation of the truth that doesn't take into account all that love for people requires, omitting those concerns dictated by respect.
And it can be at times cold and detached affirmation of the truth that it does not take into account that love for people requires, omitting these concerns detected by respect and mercy, which must be present in all stages of respect and love and mercy. No. It's like, hey, get my car out of the impound. Well, we have to do it with respect, love, and mercy to find out if it's really his car. It either is or it isn't, right? Same thing with the marriage. That's all, man. No, otherwise, if it's a hard enough case, we'll let it go. It's again, if it's a subjective definition, it's a subjective decision to do the annulment. And you'll never get rid of this unless, like I said, you get back to nature, unless you get back to ground zero, which is procreation primary, and that means nothing else is primary, nothing else is essential, and nothing else is independent.
And mercy, which must be present in all stages of a proceeding. So don't treat people coldly and legalistically, but accompany them pastorally and with great respect and mercy.
Like I said, who cares?
Don't do so in a way that pits charity against truth. Or as he said on another occasion, it is true that in God's judgment on salvation, his forgiveness of the repentant sinner is always at work. But human judgment on the nullity of marriage cannot, however, be manipulated by false mercy.
Okay, then it get like nature gets manipulated by NFP, and you have false exaggeration of the problem. You can manipulate nullity based on whatever you want. What you don't like the marriage. You don't like one of the people in the marriage. You don't want those kids to be with that person because you don't like that person. That's it. There's tons of people who are anti-Christian that are in the church, and they'll take your kids because they can through this. This is how they do it. Everybody knows that the homos want to take your kids. Well, they're in the church and they take your kids through this, and they run rampant. But they do it because who's going to stop them? Nobody. Nobody can. This is why I have this channel, and this is why I tell you guys, I'm white-pilled on marriage, but you got to do it. You got to define it for yourself. You have to apprehend the Catholic definition and not rely on your pastor to tell you it, because he can't tell you because the bishop's going to kill him, and the bishop's sold on NFP, and they all are. Okay, continue.
Any activity contrary to the service of the process of truth must certainly be deemed unjust.
Oh, yeah, this is a winner right here. Any activity, any type of judgment, contrary to the service of the process of truth. This is more like kind of mumbo-jumbo speak. Any activity contrary to truth. Basically, that's what they're saying. Anything that's not true must be deemed unjust. Correct. Anything that's not true must be deemed unjust when you're dealing with, and what is not true? That the essence of marriage is more than biology. But they all say it is, but if it's more than biology, what is it? We can't tell you. We won't tell you, but we will take your kids from you. But they say, contrary to the service of the process of truth, it's like saying, it's like removing its 3 steps. It's kind of like fudging your words.
On the other hand, it is precisely in the proper exercise of judicial authority that true mercy must be established.
Take all your mercy and shove it. Just define marriage, and everything will get right back to normal, quote unquote, like it was. Until you do that, you're going to be wrestling, like I said, with all these gray areas of human sentiment. And what happens, it's kind of like if you take a knife and put it on some kid right in the middle of the kid and cut, it violates nature. This is why it matters where you put the knife. This is why you have to define nature regarding marriage. And they're saying, no, we don't, because love is the new measure. And if it comes down and cuts your kid in half, well, sorry, that's what they do. Oh, man.
In the King James Version of Psalm 85, we read that mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other.
Yep.
That's the call of every tribunal.
Yeah, the tribunal has no definition of truth. The tribunal cannot define what is true when it comes to the essence of marriage. We will not, cannot, nor ever will tell you the truth of what the essence of marriage is, the legal essence, because it left the building once NFP got approved. And until NFP is unapproved, there is no truth. That's why you can't trust, or you got to keep your marriage away from the church, the priests and the bishops and stuff when it comes to defining or adjudicating. However, you can adjudicate yourself. So you do go to the bishop for adjudication, but you, again, as far as telling you what the definition is, they're not going to be able to give it to you because they're sold out on NFP.
Everyone working for a tribunal, and honestly, of every action that we do as Christians.
Working for a tribunal. Anybody work for a tribunal? Anybody know anybody that works for a tribunal? Anybody know a canon lawyer? That would be awesome. Totally groovy if they came on Annulment Proof to talk. That would be... Let me know.
To speak the truth in love, not sacrificing truth for the sake of a false mercy.
That's all that's going on. They've sacrificed truth for the sake of NFP. That's all it is. We ain't giving up our NFP, so the heck with the truth. And, sorry, keep going.
Nor sacrificing the warmth of charity for cold hard facts. And it's only in pursuing that union of mercy and truth that we are able to avoid the scandal of treating annulments like Catholic divorce. Now.
No, just truth. Mercy has nothing to do with it. Kind of like if you need to prove if you own a building or not, or you need to prove where the property line is. Nothing to do with mercy, just truth. Just that's all. It's all that matters.
If you want more on the radical nature of Jesus' teaching about marriage and why we know that there's no such thing as an adultery exception, I urge you to check out this longer video that I did on this subject. For Shem's
I'm going to have to check that out. I think I already talked about that, but yes, I did. I did the response video to that. The one I showed you earlier. That's the response video. I did this. It was crazy, man.
I'm Joe Heschmeyer. God bless you.
All right, so let's go to L notes. Right here. Share this tab instead. I'll make it a little bit bigger, and we're gonna bring the receipts to all these accusations against Joe that I've been making. Okay, where should we start now? So I'm making my coffee this morning. I'm like, all right, check this video out. Let's go ahead and ask AI what was up back in the day. I like to ask AI stuff because, well, it's just good for research. So, did Catholics divorce at the same rate compared to the general population in 1950 as they do today? No, Catholics did not divorce the same 1950 compared to the, okay, yeah. In 1950, so it says, so 20% of, it was basically 20% of the general population, and the Catholic population was like 5%. Catholic teaching strictly prohibited divorce, keeping the Catholic to general population divorce ratio tightly compressed simply because overall numbers were minimal. See that? So, Catholic teaching strictly prohibited it. Does Catholic teaching not strictly prohibit it today? Are you saying we changed divorce? Did the Bible get changed somehow? Yeah, it did by that Jewish guy, Joe Heschmeyer, to change the exception clause. Natural law doesn't change, divine law doesn't change, the Bible doesn't change, but Catholic teaching changed according to this. No, it's just people ignored that and they fudged it. Okay, let's see. The Catholic gap today. Okay, let's keep going. Devotion and attendance. Yeah, if you go to church more, you're going to divorce less. That's right. So, okay. Let's see. Shift in social stigma in 1950. Social and legal hurdles made divorce rare for everyone. Yeah, but still, there was still a lot of secular divorce. Today, secular normalization increases. Yeah, got it. Okay. Catholic teaching strictly prohibited divorce in 1950. That's what you said, AI. Has that changed? Catholic teaching strictly, yeah. And then, of course, AI covers its tracks because we cannot admit what's going on today as a change, because otherwise we have to go back to what's Catholic, and we don't want that. We want modernism. So it's all this hermeneutic continuity stuff. No, Catholic teaching on the nature of marriage and divorce has not changed. That's a true statement, but it's changed in practice. That's why they go, well, annulment isn't Catholic divorce, but in practice it sure is, because we've changed, we've redefined the terms of divorce to mean whatever you want, and you do it on your own. The Catholic Church still maintains that a valid, consummated sacrament, they're redundant. A valid marriage is permanent and cannot be dissolved by, if you consummate, that's right. However, the Church's pastoral approach, did you hear this? Listen, guys. However, since 1950, the Church's pastoral approach, administrative processes, and legal definitions surrounding the breakdown of marriages has evolved significantly. Let me see what Doggy is barking about. Hang on. Okay, so AI is admitting in a nice way that they've changed the definition of marriage without saying it. So they say, no, evolved. We've evolved. That's right. Our definitions have evolved, but they haven't changed. See how that's different? Okay. What stays the same? Indissolubility, permanence. Okay, let's see. Civil divorce. The Church views civil divorce as the legal maneuver to handle property and custody, but it does not end the spiritual marriage. No, the Church, in this case, views civil divorce as adjudicating that which the bishop is only allowed to do. So, and it's more complicated than that. There's it depends if you're looking at 2384 or 2383, because civil divorce is allowed if the bishop says it's okay to enforce things. Typically, though, you can still do legal separation or whatever. But as far as handle property and custody, notice they didn't say adjudicate. If you're going to enforce custody, like I said, if I want to take Joe Heschmeyer's kids, and the person who's going to enforce that, the only person who can enforce that is the bishop, because let's say Joe is not. Let's say Joe's marriage is invalid, and then I get married to Joe's wife, then I get his kids, or something like crazy like that, right? No, only the bishop can judge that stuff, not the state. Anyway, what has changed? The practice and process. That the practice and the process. By the way, no bishop is allowed to dispense with procedure. They all have to do it, but they don't. What has changed? The separation permissions. That's what's changed. What separation permissions have changed? Does that have anything to do with the separation courts I was talking about? In 1950, canon law strictly required a Catholic to get permission from their bishop before even seeking a civil separation or divorce. Where did that come from? That comes from El Bible. That comes from Matthew 19:9 exception clause, because you cannot separate, you cannot, quote, divorce, take apart, okay, unless you get the permission of the bishop, because the bishop is in charge of the contract now, ever since, like I said, last 1,000 years or so. Today, this requirement is rarely enforced pastorally, especially in cases of abuse or severe hardship. Oh, you see how that sounds? So it's just a requirement that's not enforced pastorally. So we're trying to be pastoral, because what if there's abuse or severe hardship? Would you want to enforce something that's because of abuse or hardship that's severe? Wouldn't you rather be pastoral? Look, it's divine law, it's natural law. It has nothing to do with discipline, okay, or practice. It's procedure based on the exception clause. So let's say you think your marriage is invalid and you're married to somebody. You go to the bishop and say, I want to get an annulment, and I want to separate, and the bishop can make a judgment at that time. That's what's going on. But let's say you aren't getting along and something bad's going on, or there's adultery or whatever. You have to get the bishop's permission first. Otherwise, you are putting asunder what God has joined, which is living together. You have to live together. That's the contract. That's the part that Joe doesn't want to talk about. Okay, Angela's time. Hang on. Okay, so anyway, this cannot change. No one can change bishop's permission to divorce. Nobody has the power. Not even the bishop can change that, because it is procedure. And the Pope can't change it either unless he makes all the marriages private, because of Scripture, because of divine law. You can separate, you can divorce, quote unquote, for adultery, for porneia. That's exactly where that comes from right there. And that's why it can't go anywhere. And this is the scandal. This is the heresy of go ahead and divorce on your own authority. That's a heresy. All right. Streamline annulments, broader grounds for annulment. Okay. Yeah. Annulment doesn't undo a marriage. That's right. Okay. Groovy. Lack of psychological capacity. See that word capacity right there? You have to be capable of something. If you are going to go hit a baseball, you have to be capable of swinging a bat. You don't have to be capable of, knowing having some deep, profound experience about what it's like to actually stand in the presence of Joe DiMaggio and swing. None of it matters. You only have the capacity to swing. You have to have arms, in other words. If you don't have arms, you can't do it. But now they're saying you must have so much more than just arms to swing the bat. Okay. Pastoral integration, blue. Yeah. Okay. Hang on. Let's find out. You said what legal definition has evolved? That's what I asked AI, because AI says the legal definition. Yeah. Tell us about this evolution, because we can't admit that we changed something, because if we changed, that's not Catholic, and we have to keep Joe Heschmeyer. AI is on Joe Heschmeyer's side. Okay. The primary legal definitions that have evolved with the Catholic Church's legal framework. That sounds so plausible. Concerned, what constitutes valid matrimonial consent, and who is legally capable of giving it? All right. If you have changed what constitutes valid consent, you are changing you're changing marriage, because the institution of marriage, it's constituted by something. So if you say you have to have a different bar to consent, you can change the age and stuff like that, but you cannot change what marriage is. And that's exactly what they've done. They've changed it into, we're not going to tell you exactly what it is. That way we can get rid of a marriage anytime we want. Let's see, and who's legally capable of it. All right. We don't care about that. Okay, the legal definition of consent. This is important, you guys. 1950 definition. I go back to 1950 because in 1951, that's when they started the NFP, and that's when things started to unravel. Consent was viewed almost strictly as a contractual transaction. No, it wasn't viewed almost strictly as. It was a contract. It was. That's what it was. Consent was viewed. I don't care how you view consent. I don't care what your perspective is. I don't care about any of that. What is consent? Consent to what? A contract. Consent was to a contract. If both parties were of age, understood the physical mechanics. Like I said, marriage is just biology. The physical mechanics of procreation. Most people know, yeah, I think it's by the age of puberty, you know that. And were not physically forced down the aisle. That's kind of funny. The marriage was legally assumed valid. Yeah, that's why there were no annulments. Because if you know where babies, this is what I've been saying all along. If you know where babies come from, and you can kind of do the thing, there, and no one's forcing you down the aisle, it's valid. And everyone who's listening to me, nobody was forced. Even though I felt lots of force, you weren't forced. If you were, you could go back and say, look, okay. Anyway, whatever. This definition doesn't change. All that's happened is they have redefined. That's all that's going on here. Joe Heschmeyer is a marriage redefiner. Anyone who redefines marriage is wrong. Not a good look. That's why they don't want to talk about it. This is why it doesn't square with history. That's why if you ever want to talk to the marriage redefiner, which is basically everybody out there today, ask them, what jurisdiction did the separation courts have and what did they decide? Because they were deciding the separation of spouses, which is not a mere civil effect. Child custody, who gets the money? That's not mere civil effect. That's all part of the marriage contract. Everything is together. The only thing that's civil is tax filing status and maybe your last name with the state. But everything else belongs to the bishop. Evolution, what happened? Today, 2026, so a few years later, consent is legally defined. This is going to be crazy. Not as just an act of the... Really, consent is not just an act of the will, but as a deep psychological capability. So AI doesn't even know what it's talking about. But because it is an act of the will, but what are you willing? They don't know what to... No one knows what to make of it. Dude, consent is a deep psychological capability. The legal standard shifted from did you say I do to did you have the mental, emotional, and cognitive capacity to truly understand and live out that lifelong promise. Okay. This is dumb. Did you have the mental, emotional, and cognitive capacity? Capacity for what do you need capacity for to marry? That is the question. What is the essence? What do you need capacity for? Ask Cardinal Burke. He won't tell you. Who are you going to ask? I don't know. Capacity to, you have to, not only do you have to understand the promise, you have to truly understand the promise. That's what John, everything's truly this and truly that. Understand and live out that lifelong promise. Lifelong promise of what? Total gift of self. What's that? We can't really talk about what that is because nobody knows. You see what happened? The definition of marriage left the building. As I said, You have property lines, you know where your front lawn is. The front lawn's on the ground. But if you say your front lawn is so much more than just the front lawn, it's infinite in every direction. You have to, okay, that's what happened to marriage. It just went everywhere. Went everywhere. The 1950 definition of capacity, Canon 1095, number 3. No, it's Canon 1095, 2 and 3, actually, or even number 1. Incapacity to marry was restricted to, okay, oh, here, these, they don't know what they're talking about. They're talking about Canon 1095, number 1. Basically, if you were completely nuts, you could not consent, even back in the 1970 code. But now they add, in Canon 1095, they add all the new things to the essence, like you have to be able to have deep psychological capability to basically give total gift of self. You are ruled incapable of fulfilling the essential obligations of marriage. Now, I've showed this in other videos before. Nobody let me repeat that. Nobody can tell you what the essential obligations of marriage are. No one can tell you what they are. But you have to consent to them, and you must be capable of the essential obligations. But no one will tell you what they are. And that's because it used to be the marital debt, the right over the body. Okay, like it said here, you have to understood the mechanics of procreation. Those were the essential obligations, but now it is this. This is your essential obligation right here. We can't tell you exactly what that is or what you need to do it. You just need to consent to do that, which means you have to perpetually consent, which means it's not consummated until death. Okay, and I can prove why. If you want, I'll send you the link and I'll send you some notes as to where it says the powers that be, your tribunal, admit they will not, nor can they, define what is essential, because their whole world blows up if they do. It's like an abortionist saying it's not a baby, it's really a baby. Not going to do it. We can't define human life. Legal definition of due discretion. Okay, Canon 1095 too. Ignorance or immaturity did not legally invalidate a marriage unless a party truly did not know what marriage was. In other words, if you didn't know that marriage was where you make babies, and that's what it was about, what was required. But AI doesn't admit this. That's what you had. If you didn't know that there was like conjugal activity involved, you just thought marriage was some sort of, I don't know, live together thing. No, you have to make babies. If you didn't know that, you did not have due discretion. You just didn't know, and you consented. I didn't know how to do that. But the evolution developed the legal standard of grave lack of discretionary judgment, which is the same thing. If you have grave lack of discretionary judgment as from that you have to where babies come from, you didn't know where babies come from, then you can't get married. But now it's not that you don't have to know where babies come from. You lack due discretion required to legally bind themselves to a lifelong covenant. So what we had to do was say yes to baby making. Now we have to say yes to a lifelong covenant. In other words, and that covenant is not, it's more than the contract. It's more than biology. So it's to the moon and beyond is what it is. And we don't know what it is. So therefore, if you get into a marriage and you say, whoa, I didn't know it would be like this. I didn't know I had to consent to this. I didn't know that I was going to consent to this person's who knows what all. I just didn't know. Before I got married, I didn't know what I was getting into when I got married. I didn't have discretion. Yeah, you did. It's called what everyone goes through. Nobody knows what they're getting into when they get married. Nobody. Like nobody. Then they get married and they're like, oh, so this is it. Oh, so that's who you really are. Oh, so these are your quirks and you're this and you're that. Okay. But now they say you can get out of it if you want, because if it's a total gift of self and this interpersonal communion, and you can't interpersonally commune with somebody who is less than you wanted or makes you feel funny, then you're out. Catholic divorce right there. That's all it is. You're like, I don't like this person, so I'm out. Okay, legal status of civil divorce. 1950 definition. A civilly divorced Catholic was frequently treated with severe social and ecclesiastical exclusion. What does that mean? Translation, no communion. That's right. If you divorced in 1950, you are automatically, you lose your sacraments. You don't get a Catholic burial. That's right. No Catholic burial. No. Because you are a public sinner. If we give you a Catholic burial, if we give you the sacraments, divorce is not a sin. Therefore, you can put asunder what God has joined, because that's the exception clause. All that's out the window because there's no contract, no exception clause anymore. And Joe Heschmeyer will tell you, he said this before, the exception clause is not really an exception at all. Okay? So now you can divorce and get tons of sacraments. Therefore, there's no more manifest sin, no more public sin. This is part of why I think that lady is not being excommunicated, that lawmaker in Massachusetts who was like super mega pro-abortion, where I make the point, hey, if divorced people can get communion, why can't everybody? Why not? It's manifest sin. It's public sin. Under the older 1917 canon law, yeah, that would be older. That's right. Pursuing a civil divorce without explicit permission from a bishop, from the bishop, was an offense. It is not only an offense, you're offending nature. It's an offense against nature, because if I go up to you and I just remove your arms, that would be an offense against nature. I can't do that. However, I guess if I get permission from, if I'm a doctor and I need to operate you and you sign then I got permission. See, then I can, if I have to, whatever. That's a dumb analogy, but the point is, this is all Catholic. This is this is what is supposed to be happening. Why do we have such a huge divorce problem and all these Bible retranslations or redefinitions? It's from this. Once you say yes to NFP, you say no to law, and then everything in the past disappears. As I said, all these people who say I'm wrong, tell me, what did these separation courts in 1970 adjudicate in your town, USA? And who adjudicates those questions today? And is that just? I'll wait. Evolution. The church clarified. It clarified because it was unclear before. It was unclear, but it's clarified. And we love clarification. And it's an evolution. It's not a change. Clarified its legal language to distinguish between fault and status. No, it didn't. There was always fault and status. It didn't clarify anything. It didn't need to, because you have two kinds of courts at the tribunal: the fault court and the annulment court. And today you just have the annulment court, and there's a no-fault court. That's why no-fault divorce, your bishop thinks everything is no fault, because there's no contract, because NFP says marriage is love. And that's what this crucifix says right here. So it's all no fault. This is why even the most conservative bishops you can find will say it's not our job to determine fault in the separation. No, it's totally your job, and it's no one else's job. And what happens is the kids get messed. They get confused. They're super young. They get hurt. They need mom and dad sorted out, and no one's sorting it out. And it's so sick. It's like somebody they trust giving them food with a little poison in it, and they keep taking it because they think this is good, and it's messing them up. Okay, it's child abuse. It's bad, real bad. You have got to man up, you bishops, and take back your mitre when it comes to judging separations, because the state does it, and the state hates the kids. Speaking of, in the background of this in this thing right here, that's why I said, what did I say? Till hate do us part. And I'm going to get to the Bible verse on that and explain it a little bit better. Anyway, continuing. Today, today, a civilly divorced Catholic, as in someone who does the divorcing, the guilty party. If you divorce, you're guilty. If you file, you're guilty until proven otherwise. Who has not, a civilly divorced Catholic is considered a Catholic in good standing. Everyone's a Catholic in good standing unless you've been excommunicated. But a civilly divorced Catholic who was the guilty party, who was the one who filed, because if you divorce and you filed, that's another way of saying you did it without the bishop, okay? You used to be able to, look at this. Ecclesiastical exclusion, that's a fancy way of saying no communion. But now you say can legally receive Holy Communion and is not penalized by the church. So the church can change penalties. they can, but they can't change who can receive communion or not based on natural law, based on divine law. And that's exactly what's going on. It's called heresy. That's what Joe Heschmeyer is about, man. I got flies in here because all these dogs, man. Woo, these puppies. The amount of poo I have to move is large. They're nice, they're cute, but it'll be nice by the end of the month when they all find new places to live, I hope. Whew. All right. I went from no flies to a lot of flies. It's like a barnyard in here. Okay. Yeah, you said, what was the divorce rate in the United States in 1950? Okay, yeah, 20% was 20%, and the Catholics were 4 to 6%. So 20% in 1950 got divorced, 5% of Catholics, okay? And now it's almost the same. It's close to the same. And the reason that's true is because NFP. We've said divorce is no longer a sin. Why do Catholics get divorced the same rate as everyone else? Because they used to have because they used to be denied communion and now they're given communion. That's why. How can you give communion to someone now but you used to not be able to? Legal change from no contract, no marital debt, to total gift of self. The only marital debt is now the self debt. That's it. You have to give yourself. That means you have to keep consenting. It gets a little complicated, but consent is perpetual now, not just one time. That's why they said that earlier. All right, total percentage divorce. Yeah, okay, whatever. Not many back in 1950. Due to strict social stigma and rigid implementation. Oh, strict and rigid. We don't want that. That sounds terrible. Excuse me, if you are trashing kids, would you like strict and rigid implementation of pro-life laws? Yes, because babies get cut in half if you don't. We need strict and rigid implementation of marriage law because kids get cut in half even worse, spiritually and emotionally. Bad, really bad. People wrote about this. I can send you tons of articles from the past, like 1950s, Chicago, stuff like that. Whatever, Fordham University. Like, you can't let these kids go to the civil court. Catholics get cut off from communion. That's what must happen, which means Joe Heschmeyer must say the exception clause is for separation and not for invalidity. And he won't do it. I hope he will. He's going to have to quit his job, though. He'll be fired in 5 seconds at Catholic Answers if he says that. And he'll have to get a job working at Home Depot or start his own company. Maybe he can play music on the corner. Separation from strict social. Okay. Most Catholics who did separate from their spouses did so via separation of bed and board. Ecclesiastical separation, Canon 1692, Canon 1153. It's in the code right now. It's all there. It's ignored. And they're like, well, we can ignore it because it's just the bishops have the power to ignore canon law if they want. No. Especially or when it's procedural law, they can't. They don't get to say, I'm not going to follow this because it's better for my flock. They have no authority. No one can change procedure. I mean, the Pope can tweak it a little bit, but the procedure is right there in the exception clause. If you divorce, except for adultery, there's the procedure. If you're doing this, except for that, then you go that way. That's a process. That's what this is. Can't be changed unless you change God or rewrite the Bible. And that's what they're doing. That was the Jewish rewrite. And I explained that in my other video. I've said this 5 times already. Okay. Severe canonical penalties in 1950. Separation without ever pursuing a civil divorce. Yeah. So they would just separate. Hello. The divorce is also a scandal because you're saying it's like this is why they allow divorce if there's no other way. You can always get a legal separation, and then the state will enforce the bishop's legal separation. The people go to the state and they say that this is what the bishop told us we have to do. So I'm bringing my separation contract to the state. State enforce this, and they do. They'll do it today that way. Civil divorce is a scandal. because it's a public recognition that you're not married when you really are. Okay. In 1950, church legally required a Catholic to obtain formal written permission from their local bishop before filing for a civil divorce or separation. That's right. Nothing has changed. Nothing ever will change, unless marriages go clandestine again. No. Okay. Just like you have to get an annulment in the church, you have to get a separation in the church. That's why they had separation courts. Seeking a civil divorce without this permission was considered a serious public sin. Yeah, grave sin. It's in the Third Council of Baltimore, which is still in force today. Number 163, I think it is. Yeah, in 1950, 85% of American Catholics married other Catholics. Nowadays, you can marry you don't have to marry Catholics so much because there's no contract. So you're not having a mixed marriage. You're just having a mixed. Everyone's just in love, right? The love is all there is. Gift of self. Anyone can give themselves because there's no contract. So we don't have to worry about always marrying a Catholic because it's just love. Don't you know that other people can give themselves too, right? Some people are really giving. There's some Zoroastrians that are very giving. Sociological data demonstrates same faith. There's only one faith. Marriages have always suffered substantially lower breakup rates. Yeah. That tends to be true. All right, pre-Cana. Anyway, the data demonstrates a massive historical shift. It demonstrates a change in dogma. It demonstrates a heresy. That's what it does. In 1950, the gap between Catholics, got it, was 4 to 6. Now it's 20%. Today, the gap is largely closed. Yep. And that's because there's no contract because NFP says there's none. All right. You said, what is the American divorce rate among general population today, and what is the divorce rate among Catholics today? Divorce rate among, okay, I think I already covered that, did I not? I think we've covered that enough. Okay. Here. Divorce was strictly prohibited among Catholics in 1950. Is it strictly prohibited in 2026? Is it strictly prohibited in 2026? Yes. It was strictly prohibited in 1950. How about now? No, it is not strictly prohibited in the same way as it is today in 1950. Why is that? Is that because marriage has changed? Is that because divorce has changed? Is that because the essence of marriage has changed? No, it's because they're all modernists because they said it's nature to take procreation and make it secondary. Therefore, nature is fill in the blank. Nature is bonding because marriage is bound by nature. Now, nature is bonding. And what is bonding? Legally, we can't tell you. No one can tell you. You just know it when you're feeling some bonding. And how many measures of bonding is required? No one can tell you. That's why they say marriage must be unitive and the conjugal act, unitive and procreative. That's what it means. Aspect, significance. While the theological definition of marriage remains unchanged, the Catholic Church's legal framework and moral application under the Catechism of the Catholic Church formally evolved to permit civil divorce under specific conditions. Oh, so you're saying that in 1950, you could not permit civil divorce for any reason. Is that what you're saying? That's exactly right. Because divorce is defined as separating without the bishop. But now the bishop is like, I don't know anything. I've never heard of this. You do whatever you want, kids. Just do it with God. Come back if you want the annulment. There's no sin in a divorce. I will give everyone communion who files for divorce because I can't judge. That's all he's doing because they got rid of the contract. That's what he was told in seminary. Now, if he rocks the boat at all, he's going to be nailed to the wall so fast by the Pope and everybody. It's like, no one touches this except annulment proof because who's going to fire me? Okay. I'm going to let all the puppies outside to run around the front lawn, and we're going to take a little walk. Be right back. All right, let's get back to our redefinition. So as we heard, 1950, no divorce. After 1950, yes, divorce. What is that other than a redefinition of marriage? The Catechism of the Catholic Church, 1993, formally evolved, to permit civil divorce under specific conditions. Oh, yeah, that reminds me. Okay, we already covered that. I'm going to get to the definition of divorce in a second. Let's focus on this for a minute. All that's going on is you could always separate with the bishop, and the bishop could use the state to enforce his separation decree. That's all that's going on. Never can change. That's it. It's just they've reworked it so that they allow it based on indefinition and sleight of hand, and everyone looks the other way, except annulment proof and a few other people. Like, I don't know. Actually, I don't really know anybody who's really all over this divorce stuff like me. There's a few people, but they're not on YouTube so much. Anyhow, look, 1950 versus 2026, legal and moral shift. Again, this is AI trying to cover its tracks so that it doesn't condemn modernism because it loves it. Civil legal divorce, strictly prohibited. Seeking a civil divorce without formal written permission from a bishop, that means they have to have a trial, like separation court, was a punishable offense. Yeah, it's a punishable offense under the 1983 code as well. Because nothing touches Third Council of Baltimore that has a penalty in it, and the 1983 code says you have to have the bishop's permission. If you want me to explain exactly where and why and how, I sure will in the comments. No problemo. I just don't want to be here all day because I've already been here all day. Formally tolerated in 2026 reality. The church explicitly allows civil divorce if it is the only way. Okay, what if, okay. Oh, this is stupid. Look, if it's, are you saying that there was no way to protect children before that? No. The church owns everything except tax filing status. That's it. Everything else belongs to the church. I mean, yeah, that's right. Okay, continuing. Moral guilt and sin. Oh, no, what could that be? Assumed fault. Oh, think about this. Divorced Catholics were heavily stigmatized and frequently treated as public sinners and are excluded from church life. That sounds so sad. Divorced Catholics were treated as public sinners and excluded from church life. Oh, darn 1950s people. That's so sad. Well, man, I can't believe they did that. Shame on them. I would hit them if I were there. Look, if you bail on your family, you're violating nature. Heck, yeah, there's a stigma because it's public sin. That's why. Frequently treated as public sinners. No, you are always treated as a public sinner. What does that mean? Beware, be gone, sinner. No, deny sacraments. That's exactly what that means. I can back it all up. I got the documents if you want. That's what it means, deny sacraments. Or excluded from church life, spare me. It's called no sacraments. You could come to church, you just could not get the sacraments. If you were the guilty party, if you were the innocent party, no problem. Innocent party recognition. What? Innocent party recognition in 2026. The church formally states that an innocent spouse forced into a divorce bears no moral guilt or sin. Duh, that's always been the case. Doesn't make any sense. They don't know what to do with this. They have no idea. They're saying a divorcer was guilty, but now they're not guilty because there's nothing to offend. Guilt, divorce offends nothing. It's like waving a knife in the air doesn't do anything. There's nothing there to cut, so it's no problem because it's not a contract, right? And you ask Joe Heschmeyer if marriage is a contract. What will he say? Oh, it's more. He'll say it isn't, or he'll say it's more than a contract, or something like that. Innocent. They cannot say marriage is a contract because NFP dies. That's why. Divorced Catholics were frequently barred from receiving Holy Communion by local pastors who conflated. Oh, this is so stupid. Divorcing or divorcer Catholics, not the innocent spouse, but the divorcer, were always barred from receiving Holy Communion. Who conflated separation with. Oh, the reason they did here. Check this out. This is AI trying to make sense of the obvious change. The reason why they denied communion is because the local pastor got confused. He didn't know the difference between separation. Oh, conflated separation with. He didn't know the difference between separation and adultery. He just didn't know. Actually, separation without permission is a kind of adultery, but he said separation. Remarriage and separation were the same thing. The old 1950s pastors, they were just mean, and they didn't even know the difference between remarriage and separation. That's why they denied communion. How dumb can you get, AI? Pretty dumb, I guess. Now, in 2026, it says good standing and can freely receive Holy Communion. Again, good standing is if you're not excommunicated. Even someone who is denied access to the sacraments, even someone who is not eligible for the sacraments is a Catholic in good standing. They're just not eligible. So there's a lot of tricky words here, whatever. You got to get into it. Now, this, boys and girls, is where the meat is. This is the CCC 2383 when you can get a divorce if there's no other way. Again, apostasia here. Whoops. Where is it? Oh, shoot. Let me get that back. Let me click a redo here. Apostasion, that's a word for divorce they use in the Bible, and this means you get a bill or certificate of divorce. In other words, that's just the state saying you're divorced. This is what is allowed in 2383. If there's no other way to protect kids, you can get the state, because it's a scandal is what it is. Because it's the civil power, it's the public authority saying you're not married when you are. So it's a scandal to everyone. Everyone's all these spouses, these annulment spouses, their behavior changes once they get the civil divorce. That's what happens, because no one can. Oh, that's not my wife. No one can say that anymore. It gets all real stupid. So this is divorce number 1, apostasion. Okay, now. Apuolo, this is the main one. This is the one that's in the exception clause. This is the kind of divorce you're allowed in the exception clause. This is the most commonly translated as divorce or put away or send away, literally meaning to release. Okay. Matthew 5:32 and Matthew 19:9, when Jesus teaches on the separation in marriage. That's the exception clause you can put away. It's separation with the bond remaining. That's what that kind of divorce is. Different than apostasion, it's a apoluo. Got to get that straight. You start saying divorce, what kind of divorce do you mean? There's several different kinds of divorces. You have to get the correct one. Okay, so you can, again, this is why none of this makes sense if you say that you can separate with the bond remaining if your marriage is invalid. I guess that kind of would make sense, wouldn't it? But but they say if you remarry, in other words, if you remarry, the bond is always going to be there. Is the point, because marriage is permanent. But that's what that divorce is right there. And then there's the other kind. Let's see. Is there another kind? I think there is. I could read more about this, but I've already done it in the other video. Chorizo, this is the other kind where it's absolutely destroying the bond, getting rid of it. In other words, what God has joined, you separate it. That's what they say in Matthew 19:6 when discussing the physical separation. This is what you cannot do. This is bad stuff. I did a whole video on this, like I said, but again, these are the 4 types of divorce, and here's the other kind, non-legal leaving. You got to read about this too, which they're using 1 Corinthians 7:2. Oh, yeah. Again, when you start talking, because Joe Heschmeyer mentions 1 Corinthians 7:12, I think, in this video a little bit. It's a totally different deal. This is when they're talking about Petrine privilege, that kind of thing. All right. Before I go to this, let's look at one thing real quick. These are some important quotes, and I want to get to something else in a minute. But look, why did I say, everybody, look, that because Joe Heschmeyer in his video, his thing, it says till death, ? Is it, but no, I say till hate. Let me see if I can move out of the way. Yeah, it says till hate. That's what I wrote. Because when you hate your spouse, you divorce them. This whole God hates divorce stuff is a new translation, a Protestant translation. It's a new way of Catholic translation. God doesn't hate divorce. In fact, God likes separation in certain circumstances, which I'm going to get to. But listen, if you separate, if you divorce, you hate your spouse. Unless the bishop gave you permission with a trial, you hate your spouse. It's not that God hates divorce. It's that you hate your spouse. You can't go to heaven if you hate your spouse, and you hate your spouse unless you get a separation decree, because you committed that sin of divorce. You got to solve your problem. You can't just annul your way out of it. It doesn't remove the divorce. When thou shalt hate her, Malachi 2:16. When thou shalt hate her, put her away. That is the correct translation. Due Reims. Saith the Lord God of Israel, but iniquity shall cover his garment. Saith the Lord of hosts. Keep your spirit and despise not. Don't hate her. Don't hate him. If you do, guess what's going to cover your garment? Iniquity. That means public sin. That means no sacraments. Okay? You divorce without the bishop, you go to hell. That's kind of what's going on. That's what it is. This is why everyone in 1950 got denied communion and there was no divorce. Today, everyone, you get celebrated for divorce and you're great because you acted in defense of love, and we take marriage so seriously. And this didn't rise to a sacramental marriage. We need relationship. Jesus is relationship with the Trinity and all that, and that's what we have to have, right? How about a little sirach, y'all? All malice. This is kind of cool. All malice is short to the malice of a woman. What does that mean? Hell hath no fury. That's what that means. You think you're a mad dude? Wait till you get a chick who's mad, bro. Okay, that's why she should obey. Otherwise, she wins. Randy, easy, bro. Take it easy. Let the lot of sinners fall upon her. Okay, if you're a woman of malice, you're in trouble. As the climbing of a sandy way is to the feet of the aged, so a wife full of tongue to a quiet man. Look not upon a woman's beauty and desire not for a woman's beauty. A woman's anger and impudence and confusion is great. Oh, that sounds like what St. Thomas Aquinas would say. Yeah, and that sounds like what Pearl Davis kind of says. Women are kind of like they're a different breed. Okay, this is why they're not in charge. They don't lead officially because of this. Anger, impudence, and confusion is great. A woman, if she have superiority, is contrary to her husband. You can't have this stuff. If she says, I'm superior, as in I wear the pants, as in I'm not going to obey you, she's making life unduly difficult. You cannot operate. This is grounds for separation. I just kind of figured that one out. You go to the bishop, it'll short circuit a little bit, but you say, look, someone's got to be in charge. You got to bring this to them. You got to bring this to the court. I don't know what else to do. Otherwise, she's going to say, no, forget you. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. What are you going to do about it? We're equal partners. Equal partnership, right? No one's in charge. All right. So, a wicked woman abateth the courage and maketh a heavy countenance and a wounded heart. Feeble hands and disjointed knees, a woman that doth not make her husband happy. That's so, make him happy. From the woman came the beginning of sin, and by her we all die. That's what St. Thomas Aquinas and others say. She is less in dignity because she was first in sin, but second in creation. Give no issue to thy water. In other words, don't pay attention to her. No, not a little. Nor to a wicked woman, liberty to gad abroad. So, no, you keep tabs on her. That's why Trent says she's not allowed to leave without your permission. You got to take control of the situation. As they say, maintain your frame. Nowadays, it's sort of a kill or be killed sort of thing. It doesn't start off that way in the marriage, but it eventually gets there typically, because when you have everybody saying equal partnership, equal authority, somebody's gonna move in, and the guy is told just submit, and no. Anyway, listen to this. If she walk not in at thy hand, she will confound thee in the sight of thy enemies. So these are all, again, grounds for separation. If she's doing all this stuff and you can't control it, it's like you don't want to call the cops when there's some crazy person at your house. You're hoping he can just take care of business and go away. But if he doesn't, you have to call the cops. If your wife or any spouse is getting way out of hand, you've got to call the bishop. Then what does it say to do? What does it say? Cut her off from thy flesh, lest she always abuse thee. Oh, what about abuse? Dog, there it is right there. if you got a wife who's a big old problem, she's gonna give you a stroke. It's what it says. And all malice is short to the malice of a woman, meaning she's gonna kick your booty if you don't kick hers, so to speak. That's what's gonna happen. If she's like, hey, it's girl power and all that, cut her off from thy flesh. That means separate. You got to separate. You have to do this. All right. Now, let me tell you why you're a simp if you don't. This is different than what anyone tells you. Proverbs 18:22. If you find a good wife, you found a good thing, you will receive pleasure from the Lord. That's right. Okay. He that driveth away a good wife driveth away a good thing. Yep. But he that keepeth an adulteress is foolish and wicked. So don't be a wicked fool. You don't keep the adulteress. Now, the adultery is anything that's against marriage. All the stuff we've been talking about, all this stuff right here, anything that's like makes life unduly difficult is a form of adultery, which is why Canon 1153 says that. You got to take control. You've got to. This is why I'm making these videos, to get people more informed, especially the youngsters, on what marriage is and what they got to do. It's not easy. I mean, but nowadays they're all like, everyone just get along. Yeah, sometimes you got to be the bad cop and you have to assert power. You have to assert authority. And then you have to take it to the cops, the ecclesiastical police. Neil Miggins, my buddy, sent me this today. This is pretty cool. I've been talking this whole time and I wasn't even showing you the stupid notes. I am so sorry. Here's the notes right here. Oh, that's so sad. Look, I've been talking the whole time. I didn't even show you the notes. Anyway, they're right here. All the stuff. I can't believe I didn't show that to you. I'll put it all in the show notes, okay? It's all right here. Super cool. I'm sorry I didn't show it to you. But listen, check this out. St. Vincent of Lerins. Remember I keep talking about how NFP changes nature and now anything goes? This is nothing new. Suppose that the human body were changed into another kind of body. Okay? I don't know what this Latin means. No necessitas unitas. Okay, whatever. Suppose we added limbs were added to or removed. St. Vincent, that is St. Vincent's warning about doctrine. All right? Some of you guys know what this means. I kind of do, but I don't want to figure it out right now. The result would not simply be a more mature human being. No. It would be something defective or monstrous. Growth is possible, but mutation is not. When you take marriage and say that the object is now greater than it is, as in it's different, you've added something onto it, you've added more arms, you've added more heads. No, the same human nature remains over time. Continuity, maturity, progression. A change of kind destroys the nature. Discontinuity, corruption, monstrosity. Exactly right. It destroys the nature. That nature was destroyed first, officially, in writing, in 1951, Midwives. And it all went down. It just took off, snowballed from there. The top, a little snowball at the top of the mountain was 1951 Midwives. And they got that NFP rolling, and it just took out the whole town. In doctrine, as in nature, the faith can grow, but it cannot be changed into another kind of faith. That's exactly right. I'll have to look this up. Anyway, it's time for me to show you about my decision I got to make. So hold on. I already have Susie Q, the mom, who's big, and I have another dog, Randy, who's 13. He's on borrowed time, and a cat. So this dog is so cool. This is Susie Q's biggest puppy. I've named her Barbie Q, and she's a fat one, and she's got some cool colors. So I'm trying to decide if I'm going to keep her or sell her, because you know how it is. You keep the puppy and things get wild. They start eating stuff. You know, they're all chill for a while. Look at her. Look at how fat. Anyway, I go back and forth because I've got a great setup for dogs. This place I live is like perfect for dogs. Absolutely perfect. But I don't know. I just don't know. Anyhow, so hopefully Joe will respond. If someone knows him, they can kind of send him a video and whatever. But we got to get this stuff straight. It's instead of just running away from it. But when I saw this propaganda piece, I was all over it. Thanks for watching. Toxicity is your destiny.